If you're anyone who can afford to run for office, you've probably said something like this.
Out of touch.
Out of touch.
She's firmly out of touch.
The thing is, I want to trust a rich person when they tell me another rich person is out of touch, but not even George Soros could pay me enough to buy that one. When members of Congress aren't running away from their constituents or joining a sex offender registry, are they actually representing the people who elected them? On today's agenda, we're investigating. Is Congress really out of touch? Congress currently enjoys an approval rating of 22%, making it the least popular branch of government after the one your grandpa pulled off a tree, porque tu abuelo no le habla así. But how does the legislative branch flagellate America? Congress makes our laws and is divided into two bodies. The Senate, where each state is afforded 2 senators, and the House of Representatives, where each state is afforded proportional representation based on their population. In an effort to understand whether or not Congress is out of touch with Americans, let's look at how they compare to average Americans. Members of Congress make $174,000 a year, or more if they're in a leadership position. To put that into perspective, the average household income for the United States is about $73,000, and the median, $53,000. Whichever way you swing it, members of Congress make more than the majority of Americans, and technically they work fewer days. Since 2001, Congress has averaged about 139 days in session. You're probably thinking, that's not a lot, but in 2014, one brave man in Virginia wasn't afraid to say, "I'm not paid enough for working half the year." Democrat Jim Moran, a retiring representative at the time, declared members of Congress were underpaid.
And I know people think this is a lot of money, but you know, if you're not going to show respect to yourself as an institution, you can't expect the public to show you much respect either.
Maybe the most compelling argument for getting paid more is that they actually have responsibilities outside of Congress, like visiting their home states and speaking to constituents. But apparently, that's not even something they do well. Members of Congress love showing up to events and interacting with constituents, as long as it's convenient or their name is on a banner. But when they are more likely to take calls from lobbyists and party leaders than their actual voters, they're not meeting the most basic requirement of their job: to represent the people living in their home state. Like Jason Chaffetz, the Utah Republican who got shredded at a town hall meeting for his partisan approach to chairing the Oversight Committee and trying to pass insurance legislation. He later suggested Americans should give up their phones to pay for healthcare, even though his donors paid for his. It's almost like he wasn't even listening! Or how about Marco Rubio, the little man you saw earlier, shown running away from a constituent after being caught lying about a trip to Europe to avoid a town hall entirely.
Senator, I thought you were in Europe. What? I thought you were in Europe. Are you going to host a town hall? Are you going to host a town hall?
And sure, not every congressperson is that shifty, but just when you think you found a thoughtful legislator with good intentions and a radical view of the future, they are still unwilling to change the status quo. Like the time liberal hero Cory Booker tried to explain his vote against lowering drug costs, even though he makes bank from pharmaceutical lobbyists. Or the time Chuck Schumer proposed a federal blacklist of companies, including those owned by his own constituents, because they were protesting Israeli policies. Or the time Nancy Pelosi said this to a young voter asking about Democrats shifting on economic policy.
Well, I thank you for your question. But I have to say, we're capitalist. And that's just the way it is.
Okay, so they're rich and hate the idea of radical change, but at least they're representative of the great diversity this nation holds. Right? That would be a small consolation. But even though the 115th Congress is our most diverse yet, we don't even get that. For example, white people make up 81% of the current Congress, but account for just 62% of the US population. Conversely, women make up just 19% of Congress, even though they account for a little over 50% of Americans. Nothing better exemplifies this disparity than Mike Pence's infamous selfie with House Republicans last year. So since this is the norm for white Republicans, let's use it as a canvas upon which we can imagine a new, more inclusive legislature. First, we're just gonna add a little bit of color here. Really brighten up this dull white expanse. We're just gonna throw some women in here, and not just the white ones. You really wanna emphasize women of color, because you don't see a lot of those in these paintings. And just happy little women of color. 90% of Congress is Christian, but only 70% of the US is, so we're just gonna throw in a Muslim, an atheist over there, maybe a Jew. You really want to focus on the fine details here. There, my painting skills are a work in progress. Much like equality. You don't need an art degree or a public access show to change this image. Instead of a paintbrush, you have a voting ballot. Unfortunately, our last midterm election had the lowest voter turnout in almost 70 years. Only 36% of us showed up. So before you skip the next round, ask yourself an important question. If most of the people crafting our laws are overpaid, don't take our concerns seriously enough, and aren't even as diverse as the people they're supposed to represent, who speaks for us in Washington? How is your congressperson doing? Do you even know who they are? Let me know in the comments. See you November 2018, or I'm gonna come to your house and yell at you for not voting.